Hello and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. Now, 2020 has been a bumper year for right-wing people online complaining about censorship. So we're going to take a look at some of the stories that the right-wing think have been censored and try and figure out why that might be. To do this, we'll look at it through the lens of our old friend, pigeon-brained Felix Rex, and a video he made on the subject. Let's jump in.
2020, like no other year, I believe, has left the establishment wearing no clothes and has exposed the hypocrisy and the sinister collusion of global finance, the corporate-owned mainstream media they control, and the unbridled urge of big tech to anoint themselves as the arbiter of reality and what can and cannot be thought and what can and cannot be said in free countries across the world.
Quick translation, he's just meaning basically the pushback against fake news.
Thus, again, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at what my list of the top 5, and with honorable mentions toward the end, my list of the top 5 memory hold, omitted, and suppressed news stories of 2020. Because of content like this, both of my channels, along with many other people's channels that I know of, have since the November election been seriously shadow banned by big tech. Subscribers are being shed by the thousands and view counts have collapsed.
Yeah, well, just like the explanation for the election when they didn't get the results they want, rather than accepting that Trump is fantastically unpopular and is less popular now than he was before that, which was in its own right fantastically unpopular, rather than accept that reality, they accuse the other side of cheating. Here you can see another example of that kind of thought. Because his view count has collapsed, he's thinking it's shadowy big tech shadow banning his stuff. Now, YouTube probably does mess around with the algorithm, but I think it's far more likely that Black Pigeon Speaks, Felix Rex's channel's numbers have been dipping because his popularity has been dipping. Because, it's kind of a crisis point for that kind of idiotic perspective. A few years ago, in sort of 2016, they had the sort of run of the internet with countless alt-right nut jobs just spouting their drivel and with very little pushback from alternative sources. But now there is alternative sources, and certainly online, the right is hemorrhaging followers, and that's much more likely to be the reason that his channel and other channels like his aren't doing so well. It's because his perspectives aren't doing so well. His ideas are bad, and people are starting to notice this.
The number 5 in this list is some of the most memory hold stories of the year. Does anyone remember at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic of people being welded into their homes by the authorities? That the disaster zone of Wuhan was described as a zombie land, with people collapsing in the streets and medics patrolling in hazmat suits. Does anyone remember the images of people just falling down and started to convulse and shake and spit blood everywhere? And it was images like these that were used, I would say, to implement the crackdowns and lockdowns and the destructions of civil liberties in Western countries.
Yes, I do remember those videos. What you have to understand about those videos is that, I have a fair amount of experience with the Chinese government to a certain extent, in the sense that I used to live in China for a period. And here's the deal. The Chinese government is kind of crazy. They're a totalist regime, and they put out a lot of wacky propaganda, just like they do in like North Korea or any kind of crazy kind of place, And that crazy, wacky propaganda was never intended to leave the the shores of China. It's actually illegal to take printed media or news media from China out of China because they don't like it to be shared, because it was never intended to be seen by an international audience, because quite a lot of it's absurd, including these things. These videos were put together by Chinese propagandists in order to frighten people into following lockdowns. Now, I don't necessarily agree with putting out nonsense propaganda. I definitely don't. That's one reason why I'm left-wing. But you can sort of see why they might have done that, and you can also see why maybe being a bit more worried about the coronavirus's seriousness might have helped us over here in the West. But here's the deal. At the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, things were a bit confused, and we didn't know what information coming out of China was propaganda and what wasn't. And so some of that stuff got shared internationally, and then we stopped sharing it once we realised it was nonsense. Once we realised that people bleeding from the mouths and collapsing in the street and behaving like zombies wasn't any of the real symptoms of corona. Once we realised what the situation actually was, we stopped putting it out. It's not a case of it really being banned, it's just a case of if you find out as a news supplier that something's not true, you probably should stop putting that out. I know this is like a sort of alien concept to the right wing in general, because their media tends to pump out lies that they know that are lies continuously. I mean, you only have to look at the recent apologies that have had to be made by right-wing news outlets for committing libel against the voting machine companies. But yeah, the reason it's not being spread around anymore and has been effectively taken off the internet is because people discovered that it wasn't true. And as a news outlet, usually you can get in trouble for promoting things that aren't true. So not really censorship.
So, what little credibility the media had evaporated in 2020. Do you ever wonder why YouTube is forcing mainstream media on its users and algorithmically destroying independent content creators? It's because nobody trusts the mainstream media, as their blatant lies, their corruption, and suppression of legitimate news has become too blatant to ignore. Actually, according to the New York Post, a majority of voters say the media intentionally buried the Post's October bombshell about Hunter Biden's laptop to help his father, Joe Biden's political campaign.
Now, here's the issue with that. You can't bury a story that is not a story. Because there is no such thing as Hunter Biden's laptop. It's just made up. It's a load of old rubbish. That nobody has been able to provide anything really significant from it. Different people, apparently, who are totally against Hunter Biden, such as Rudy Giuliani, apparently had access to this laptop, or maybe some stories, multiple laptops floating around, which apparently had all sorts of satanic, paedophile, QAnon nonsense on. Obviously they didn't. It's total rubbish. The only thing they had on it was a few of his nudes and his apparently quite impressive penis. But spreading around someone's nudes, it's not news. It's not news. It's just well, I don't know what it is. It's kind of revenge porn or doxing or something in that area. I'm not sure what the legal terminology for it, but there's not really much justification to be spreading that around, to be honest. It's his own private business. Nothing illegal going on there. Everyone involved was consenting and over legal age. It's just a complete non-story. And it's not even relevant, because it's not like Hunter Biden standing for office. His dad is. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. This is a completely absurd story. And this is just like what I was saying about them keeping on repeating things that have been disproven in the right-wing media, because there's nothing in this story. It's a big nothing burger. It's just nonsense. You know, I don't particularly like Joe Biden at all. You know, I don't agree with him on a lot of his policies. I think he's far too right-wing for me. He's better than Trump though. But here's the thing. This story is just literally a nothing. It's a nothing.
Number 3 in this series is of the Russian hoax being exposed and those peddling it going unpunished. For 3 years, the media and their talking heads spewed unsubstantiated lies, bile, malice, contempt, and then they just made things up. None more than MSNBC host Rachel Maddow. This journalist still has work. And this tells you a lot more about the industry she works in than it does about her own work as a political advocate.
Yeah, this is also total nonsense. A lot of people have gone to prison for their involvement in this. It's not a hoax. It really happened. There was collusion, there was criminal undertakings, there was all kinds of bullshit going on. And the only reason why Trump didn't go to prison for it is because he was president at the time, and they weren't sure how they could legally wrangle that. But if he wasn't, he would have done, because what he did was illegal, and a lot of people went to prison. A lot of people he's since pardoned in what probably should be illegal pardons, because that is blatant corruption. That's blatant corruption. If he was interested in blatant corruption, he should maybe take a look at that blatant corruption.
Probably the most censored story and suppressed story of 2020 was that of the November election contest between Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. All one needs to do is take a look at these stats, and it might get the noggin jogging, but none of this matters. Even bringing up verifiable statistics doesn't matter. The media has suppressed almost everything with regards to this story, and big tech will censor anyone, all the way to the president himself, that questioned the integrity of this election.
Yeah, factually incorrect. In fact, the head of the FBI or whoever, I can't remember who it was, looked into it. They questioned it. They investigated it. It's been investigated countless times. The courts have questioned it. They've had to question it to investigate it. And you know what they found? Nothing. That it was one of the safest, the most secure elections that America has ever seen. That's what they found, because the questions have been answered. What you're doing is not questioning things. It's spreading falsehoods to try and kick up civil unrest. It's essentially stochastic terrorism. And stochastic terrorism really should be illegal. If it's not, it is illegal some places. I feel like if the laws were working properly and were being enforced properly, it would be. And, companies like YouTube don't want legal set to semi-legal to completely illegal things on their platform, because then, of course, what will happen is the advertisers will leave. Let's say some goofball watches one of your videos that alleges that the election was stolen, which I'll reiterate, there is absolutely no evidence for whatever. None. Zero. Zip. Zilch. Nada. Nothing. And they are sort of fooled by your rhetoric into thinking that might be the case, by your vague allusions and repetition of thoroughly debunked stories. Again, it's an example of them not stopping releasing things which are objective lies and that they know have been thoroughly debunked because it suits their agenda. And then this character who's watched the video goes out and tries to start a, inverted commas, civil war by shooting a couple of his neighbours. What then? What do you think the advertisers are going to say to YouTube? I mean, that's capitalism, baby. They're not going to want to be associated with a platform that has that kind of mad nonsense on it.
The number one memory hold, omitted, and suppressed news story of 2020, well, this is the top story. Never before has it been this bad. For example, this channel itself, since the election, has lost views. Views have cratered. Subs have been shed by the thousands.
So this year's biggest censorship story is connected to the way that less people are finding Felix Rex's channel interesting, are stopping watching, and are unsubscribing from watching his nonsense. Maybe that has something to do with the way that a lot of the right-wingers were promoting predictions that Trump would win by landslide and various other things that have just not been borne out by reality, have not borne any relation to reality, to the reality that we are now facing, and that, their rhetoric is starting to seem a little bit 2016, a little bit poisonous and self-defeating to the people who consumed it in the past. And here's the thing, this is what all of these stories are really about. All of these things, all of this crying about censorship, all of this wowing is actually actually all about is about from around sort of 2015 to relatively recently, the right wing have just been able to pump out completely wild nonsense, constructing a narrative which is so at odds with reality at every turn, and what they're facing now is a bit of a pushback against that. I mean, it happens every so often that there are these cycles in YouTube success, you know? A little while ago, there was the reply girl phenomena, where attractive-looking women would utilize their appearance in the thumbnails of videos, apparently replying to other content creators to attract views, and some of these people did really well because they were kind of gaming the algorithm. But then what happened was YouTube tweaked the algorithm, and they sort of fell by the wayside because that wasn't how YouTube wanted people to be using their platform. Similarly, YouTube doesn't want people to be using their platform to infect the world with what is essentially a fascistic death cult mentality. They don't want to be the source of that. Whether that's for ethical or even financial reasons, they don't want to be connected to that kind of incredibly unpleasant behavior. So maybe they've tweaked their algorithm, or maybe people have just decided that that isn't how they want to spend their time. And what this wang about censorship really amounts to is a little gasp as they realize that the time that they took for granted as being the kings of YouTube is coming to an end. And I think that's really a good thing for all people. It's a good thing for humanity, and weirdly, it's actually a good thing for them, because they could knock it off and spend their time doing something far more productive that would probably make them a lot happier. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time. Mwah!